Good morning, brothers and sisters. We're going to go through our Sunday school lesson. If I had the opportunity to have a whiteboard in front of me, I would write the words the Passover. And I would ask you what you know about the Passover. And then I would ask you, after I wrote these words on the board, the cross of Christ. And then I would ask you, what, if any, similarities do you see between the cross of Christ for Christians and the Passover for Jews? You know, I want to emphasize that, like as the Passover is about redemption for the Jews, the cross of Christ is about the redemption for Christians. I'm going to pull out the old trusty KJV here, and I'm going to read to you 1 Corinthians 5:7. And the Bible says, "Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us." Now I'm going to have you pause and do your reading in the Old Testament in the book of Exodus. I want you to turn to chapter 11 and read verses 1 through 3. You know, from the 9 plagues that had already been inflicted on Egypt, the land laid in ruins, and their gods shown to be powerless against the God of Israel. You know, one of the most powerful empires in the world at that time had been completely devastated, and fear paralyzed the people of Egypt. You know, the Egyptian people were eager to see the Israelites depart from their land, but still their stubborn Pharaoh, the ruler of their land of Egypt, would not allow the Israelites to go. You know, God announced to Moses that he would bring one final plague on Egypt. You know, this plague would be so very dreadful in its consequences that Pharaoh would thrust or expel the Israelites from his land. You know, this 10th and final plague would both humble Pharaoh and magnify the reputation of Israel's God before the Egyptians. You know, God instructed Moses to tell the Israelites to request from their Egyptian neighbors jewels of silver and of gold. The Egyptians were more kind to the Israelites now that their land lay in ruin by the plagues that had befallen them. You know, God's people, the Israelites, had long suffered oppression and deprivation as slaves to the hands of these Egyptians. So, you know, now it's fitting that at the threshold of their departure from Egypt, God provided compensation for the Israelites by the Egyptians, who had for so long robbed them of their just compensation for the labor that they performed in making the brick. You know, God always has ways of taking care of his own. God gave the Israelites and Moses favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. And Moses was considered at that time very great by the Egyptians and the Pharaoh's officials. You know, therefore the Egyptians gave generously to the Israelites, enriching them with material wealth just before their departure from Egypt. Okay, let's pause. We're going to read Exodus 11, verses 4 through 9. Here, we learn that God used Moses to pronounce this 10th plague to Pharaoh. this time there would be a difference in the way this plague would occur. Moses and Aaron would not act as agents in bringing the plague. In fact, and the Pharaoh would be given no space to change his mind and refuse to release the Israelites after the plague. This plague would be so devastating and decisive against the Pharaoh and against the Egyptians that they would all urge the Israelites to depart from Egypt. There would be no question. In the darkness of the middle of the night, God would send his destroying angel throughout the land of Egypt, killing the firstborn sons of all the Egyptians and the firstborn males of all their cattle. In Hebrew, the word for firstborn means a male. So there would be death throughout the land of Egypt, affecting the Egyptians from the firstborn son of the very Pharaoh to that of the lowliest servant, and in including all their animals. Pharaoh's firstborn son was heir to the throne and was regarded as a god by the Egyptians. But Israel's God would take his life away. The time fixed about midnight, the dead time of the night, when they were all asleep, all their firstborn should sleep the sleep of death. Silently and insensibly, so as to not rouse the families at midnight to stand by and see them die. As a result of this plague of death, there would be an unprecedented weeping throughout Egypt, as said in verse 6. It is interesting to note that one of the responsibilities of the Egyptian goddess Isis was to protect their children. In the face of this plague of death, God demonstrated the failure of those Egyptian gods. To further display the sovereignty of God, it was made clear that the people of Israel would be protected by God from the death that would plague the Egyptians' firstborn sons. This would prove to the Egyptians that the Israelites were who they claimed to be, God's chosen people. Moses said that. And after this last plague, the Pharaoh's officials would come and bow down before him and plead with him to take the Israelites and to get out of Egypt. Having delivered to Pharaoh the announcement of this last plague, Moses departed from his presence for the last time, as it says, in great anger. Enraged that Pharaoh's stubborn defiance of the God of Israel had brought these events to this tragic outcome for himself and for his people. God made it clear to Moses that in spite of his having been warned about the death that was coming, Pharaoh would not relent and give the Israelites freedom to leave Egypt. He continued until after this last plague came. Therefore, this plague of death against Pharaoh and the Egyptians had to happen. Let's pause. We're going to move into Exodus chapter 12. I want you to read Exodus 12, verses 12 and 13. Exodus chapter 12 tells of the institution of the first Passover observance and of the making of this observance an ordinance to be kept annually by the Israelites and their descendants, as it says, forever in verse 24. God giving instruction to the Israelites through Moses prepared the Israelites to escape the death angel that would pass through Egypt, and to celebrate their redemption by God from slavery in Egypt. Passover would mark the long-awaited answer to the cries of the Israelites in Egypt to be delivered from those that oppress them. God through Moses informed the Israelites that he would kill the firstborn of the Egyptians, both man and animal. And God made it clear that he would enact this plague this very night. However, it would take place after the Israelites had partaken of their Passover meal, the Passover lamb or goat, roasted over a fire and eaten with unleavened bread and vegetables. And when the Passover lambs were killed or sacrificed to God by those Israelites, they were to catch the blood that came from the cut in the neck of each lamb to bring about its death. And they were to spread the blood on the two side posts and the top post of every entry door or every entry to their home. And this was said to protect all the Israelites within the home so that the death angel would pass over them and none of them would die. God said that he would pass through the land of Egypt in verse 12, killing the firstborn of the Egyptians, but he would pass over the blood-protected homes of the Israelites. So there's a significant difference between the words pass through and pass over. To pass through conveys the idea of covering the whole land with the judgment of God. And to pass over meant the death angel would spare the houses of the Israelites whose doorposts were smeared with the blood of the Passover lambs. We're going to continue reading in Exodus 12. I want you to skip down to verse 21 and read through verse 28. Moses told the elders of Israel the instructions God gave to him in regard to the observance of the first Passover in Egypt. After the blood was applied to the doorpost, no one was to leave the house. Moses told the elders that God would kill all of the firstborn of Egypt, but if the Israelites obeyed God's instructions, that they would be safe. Instructions for the institution of the Passover are as an ongoing religious feasts are given in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. Here God commanded that the Israelites and their descendants, the Jews, to keep the Passover as an annual ordinance forever. To be a perpetual reminder to all future generations of what God did for Israel at the very first Passover. After hearing these instructions from Moses, the people bowed their heads and worshiped God, as it says in verse 27. And they did as the Lord had commanded them. And as a result of their believing in the word of God spoken to them by Moses and obeying, notice I said, and obeying the word, the Israelites were saved from the death angel. All right, we're going to pause once again. I want you to read Exodus 12, verses 29 and 30. The terror, the very terror that befell the Egyptians on the night of the deaths of their firstborn, is told in a very brief but very horrifying detail. In these verses, it says it came to pass. It says there was not a house of the Egyptians where there was not at least one dead. And as a result of this horrifying event, intense, painful lamentations encompassed all of Egypt. Firstborn sons were not only sons, they were also adult males who were husbands. They were fathers. They were even grandfathers. Imagine a family in which the husband, the father, the son, and the grandfather were all firstborn. Doubtlessly, most of the families in Egypt had multiple deaths. That's devastating. All right, we're going to pause one more time. This is our final reading. Exodus 12. I want you to read verses 31 through 36. You know, Pharaoh had banished Moses from his presence, saying that he did not want to see his face again. That was actually in Exodus 10:28. Nevertheless, on the night of the Passover, the Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron, and he commanded them to take with them the Israelites, their flocks, and their herds, and to be gone from Egypt. He also asked them to bless me also on their way out. You know, the Egyptians urged the Israelites to leave quickly. It says, for they said, lest we all be dead men. You know, the Israelites responded to their opportunity to leave Egypt by leaving immediately. They gathered up their bread dough intended for the next day before it was leavened and baked, and gathered their clothes in bundles to be carried on their very shoulders. You know, from this circumstance of leaving Egypt so quickly, the religious feast of unleavened bread was thereafter observed among the Israelites for 7 days, following the observance of the annual Passover. You know, the Egyptians not only urged the Israelites to leave, but they gave them all they needed for their journey, as promised by God earlier to Moses. Through this Passover, God saved him from the death angel. He also provided for them everything they needed. I hope you all understand. If you have any questions, let me know. Love you.